Hey heroes, DJ here. Today I'm going to sit down in the training lab with Vernon Griffith. We're going to talk all things mobility. Stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. For those of our followers who don't know you, why don't you give us a quick intro and just tell us a little bit about yourself, Coach?
I'm Vernon Griffith. I hate doing this part where you have to talk about yourself. It's the most cringiest thing in the world. I hate it. I work primarily with, I work in professional collegiate athletics in the private sector. I work a lot with military special operations guys. So that's kind of my bread and butter for people that I work with, I guess, for the most part.
Tell us a little bit about how you got into mobility. And has that always been your focus? Is it a newer focus? Did the people you train kind of lead you there?
I mean, to me, I think the lead into mobility was almost a joke because a lot of the guys, most of the guys, and I use guys as a loosely used word, girls as well, but most of them are injured. So we're dealing with multiple injuries. And, for most of the coaches listening or watching this, there's not many textbooks or answers for multiple injuries. There's things to say for one injury, do this, but now if we're dealing with 2, 3, maybe even more, where do we start? So then it get back to that word mobility and the ability to move, and how do we prescribe movements and, provide interventions to assist movement and to make movement better. And it almost became a joke with some of my friends and some of my colleagues. And I'm just like, well, mobility, that's what it is. And it was almost, I don't want to say we're a joke, but that's what it was, because people perceive mobility as just this yoga mat, relaxation, ponytails, Lululemon, which I love Lululemon. It's a great product. But at the same time, it's a lot more than that. What adaptation are we actually chasing? Are we trying to create an adaptation that's useful? Are we creating durability within our athletes? So to me, it's just looking at that word mobility for what it truly is, the ability to move, and how do we load that movement? That's kind of what I think mobility is. And I think what people are drawn to, because when the second you start looking at mobility like that, it's everything. Everything is a mobility intervention, a squat, a push-up. Everything can be a mobility intervention when done with the appropriate level of intent behind the movement.
You hit on this a little bit, but maybe we can go even a little deeper, rather than just asking the question, what is mobility? Because you just hit on that. What is mobility not?
I think, the word can be used in multiple avenues. I think it's a lot more than what we used to see it defined in a textbook as is, the only interventions for mobility were soft tissue releases or foam rolling or stretching. And obviously, when we look at strength training underneath a load, that is a stretch intervention. That is mobility. And then also nowadays, it's almost becoming this world where more is better. And we value individuals that have this tremendous amount of range of motion as, oh my God, that's normal. That's what I should be chasing. I should be able to do the splits. I should be able to put my knee this far past my toe. And that's not true for most individuals. I can't do any of that. So to me, it's almost like the pendulum has swung and then it's swung back. So I don't know if there's misconceptions or wrong things with mobility, but it's so many people trying to wrangle this word in for to benefit their needs. And you could say the same thing about me. I think mobility means this word, and I design programs based off of what I feel this word means. No different than someone else, but I've seen definitions of mobility. Is it a range of motion through a joint? Is it the pliability of the tissues, which, the definition between flexibility and mobility? I've seen them both interchangeable in between textbooks. So it's trying to figure out which one it is. But to me, going back to what that word is, it's the ability to move. And then how do we move? And are there restrictions within movement that we need to provide those localized interventions like the myofascial release type stuff or foam rolling and stuff like that? All those things are correct. But I think when we pigeonhole mobility into just that, then that becomes the issue, because it is so much more. When it comes to mobility, I look at things also from a personality standpoint. It's almost a loose versus tight. So loose versus tight, we program it from a physical standpoint, like I feel loose or I feel tight. But I also look at it from a personality standpoint. Are you a loose guy or are you a tight guy? Are you a guy that wants to walk in and you just want to get right to the weights? or are you someone that likes to roll around on the ground? From there, the intervention that me as a coach would provide is important, because if I tell you to roll around on the ground, even though I do perceive that as valuable, and you're a pallet jack that just wants to bench press, that's probably not the best first step for me. So, so that loose versus tight, I think, is not just a physical thing, but it's a psychological thing. And you as the coach, you need to figure out which track they are in before you try to provide an intervention.
Definitely. Yeah. Coming from a guy who's one of those, in my athletic career, I hated warming up.
Going off that, that's one of my favorite takeaways when people ask about my programs or what I'm doing, and they use the word warm up, because most people look at warm up as it's just the first 10 minutes of a session. And to me, the beauty of when I think about the word mobility is blurring the lines of the warm up, so that maybe an athlete doesn't realize when the warm up ended and the actual session started. Because when we start to look at tissue from a loading standpoint and velocity standpoint and trying to create more durability, then that warm up becomes very dynamic. So that warm up, like you just said, it's something we just like, oh, I got to get a warm up done. What if we start loading it? What if I'm using the landmine, and for that groin sway that I would normally do for an athlete, and now we're loading that sway with a landmine? The athlete just thinks, great, we're getting right to a bar. We're getting right on the platforms. We're training right now. We're still doing the same warm-up quotation movement, but you feel like you're doing more. To me, that's a win. And we look at mobility in that capacity, we can have those small victories.
People who haven't tried your programming, I mean, is that what they can expect in from a direct to consumer, not necessarily working direct with you, but let's say I'm doing it in my garage gym here.
Though I have like an Explore mobility program, and then a second one as a second installment. But those, when I look at mobility, and I hope what other people do when they start a program is, it's not the Bible. It's not something that you are supposed to do and follow to a T. To me, as a coach, I want to be inspired by things. So when I program movements, yes, you can follow it to a T. You can do it exactly like that. You can prescribe that to your clients. Perfect. But the goal with all of the things that I'm sharing is that it would pique people's curiosity. One of my favorite things is when people, especially in the Explorer team, tag me on something on Instagram. They're like, hey, I took that one movement you did today and I added this to it. Or I tried to get more range of motion in my hip, or I rotated more this way and I felt it higher in my hamstring. To me, that's a win. Because the goal isn't to create people to just follow what the hell I post. The goal is to create people that it sparks curiosity. It makes them want to take something that I did and make it better. That's what I hope the goal is. And from the feedback I've gotten from many people that are doing the program, that's what I've gotten out of it. Now they're doing this with their clients. Now they're doing this with their athletes. And I'm like, holy crap, that's a great idea. I'm going to put that in the second installment of the mobility thing. And I'm just going to totally take that idea and move it over here.
If you had to pick on a limited budget, what are the most important tools, or maybe the most important tool for mobility that you should have at your disposal if you want to get serious about it? And is it the landmine, or would you say something else?
I mean, so when you say landmine, I just say barbell. You don't need an attachment. You could just use the corner of a wall. You can use 2x4s to put them together so you don't ruin your wall, but it's just a bar. And to me, it came out of necessity. I was working with a high school football team, and we didn't have it. We have, a 20-pound dumbbell and a 25 and then a 32, all those random, not 32, sure. But you know what I'm saying? Those random sure, dumbbell numbers. But we needed something that was consistent. So we had 8 barbells. So from there, we could put that barbell in up against the rack, wedged between another plate. And now we can do a landmine sway. We can do an RDL. We can do a squat pattern. And I like it because it gets them leaning forward. Everything is, and especially in football, is getting you forward, getting into your ankles, getting your knees past the toe, getting your body leaning in that forward position. So to me, that landmine setup creates that aggressive acceleration angle. I can lean forward. I have a little bit of balance. I have a little bit of stability. And honestly, there's a lot more intent when you're grabbing a cold bar than when you're grabbing one of those tiger sticks that you're just like rolling on your quad. Like there's more intent behind that. People are dialed up. They're focused. They think it's strength training. People associate that with effort. when you ever on a foam roller, who takes foam rolling serious? Not many people that I've worked with.
Sure.
But the second they're touching a bar, they do take that serious. If I have them lay on a foam roller, they're going to be wincing the whole time and just kind of in an arched back position. But if I have them in a seated position with the bar and they're just kind of, kneading or whatever, the quad, rolling it back and forth, there's more intent behind that. They're more focused. So to me, it's just, it connects the dots that I found with the clientele that I had. They take it a little bit more serious, and it helps blur the lines between that warm up. So that's why I like it. And a barbell's one purchase.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier. It does more, especially for people in a home gym. Especially for me, I have a garage setup now. I'm not going to buy anything that can only do one thing.
Yeah.
If I can't do it for multiple uses, I'm not going to buy it. The most important thing you can have for a home gym or any gym space is open space. And if you're going to put anything in a space to use it up, you better be able to use it for multiple things.
So I'm hearing something in this, and just wanted to, kind of echo it again, but it sounds like intention is really something that's very important.
I mean, absolutely. If you don't take a set of squats serious, what's going to happen? You're going to get buckled.
Yeah.
What's going to happen if you don't take a set of deadlift serious? Well, you're going to have terrible form. Anything that you want to have a positive outcome out of, you have to have higher intention. So intention, but that goes with the coach as well. You have to relate that this is very important. We can get a lot of value out of these movements. If you're just like, oh, hey, today's warm up on the board is I want you to do adductor rock backs, a walk and lunge, and then we're just going to kind of get going. Then they're going to be like, well, I'm just going to knock this out, blah, 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 and then I'm going to get going. But if you perceive it with high intent, you have a breath protocol with it, you're timing it, you're creating some sort of restriction to the movement, and you have value behind it, and the athlete's like, oh my God, this is serious. This isn't just a warm up. This is actual programmed. We are progressing these movements. They're going to take it more serious, of which you're going to get more out of every movement after that. And also your warm up and your mobility is evaluation screen. You're constantly evaluating how they're feeling that day, asking questions, watching what's moving. That is very powerful information that if you're just blowing through it and skipping through it to get to bench press, you're missing out.
So thanks, Coach. I wanted to make sure that we have enough time here. We asked our Instagram followers to write in with some questions that they had about mobility, and I wanted to dig into those if we can, and we'll start with the first one here. This one is more from the coaching side, but do mobility screens and the requisite certifications have merit? Are they worth the money? And is there an alternative method or process that you can provide to young coaches when assessing mobility?
Ooh.
They were good questions.
So I actually had, it was in the Mobility Explorer team, not to plug that, but one of the guys, Jeremy, brought up this quote, and I think it was from Bruce Lee, that said, because we were talking about how do you start teaching someone strength and conditioning, because there's so much more than the black and white of which it's in a textbook. But if you don't start with the black and white, then how do you respect that to move towards the gray? So I think when it comes to a mobility screen, I think it's a great start to maybe engage a coach's eye that you start looking for things, but no different than a caliper for a body fat test. If the same person isn't doing it the same way every time, that test might not be the most reliable. So make sure that the tests that you are using are consistent and they are gauging, what you are trying to evaluate as a coach. If you're not going to use the numbers and you're not going to have value behind them, how important are those measurements? So make sure you're not just collecting data for data's sake, and you're actually using, what you are collecting. So I do think there is value behind them, but when people use that as an end all be all, I think that's where we kind of miss. And sometimes the best screen is a subjective questionnaire, asking an athlete how they feel for the day. Where do they feel things during a movement, asking them, where do you feel this, instead of preempting it and saying, hey, do you feel this here? Hey, do you feel this in your hamstring? They're gonna be like, oh yeah. Where's your hamstring? And they touch their quad. They have no idea. So asking someone, where do you feel something? That sort of feedback can be very valuable.
This was from someone internal, actually, and I think all of us, both at TrainHeroic and really anywhere you work, you can absolutely relate to this. But as a busy dude, I tend to have compressed training schedules with only 45 minutes to train over lunch. I just want to get after it. At the same time, I know mobility is important and I have a pretty banged up body. How would you recommend designing mobility into a short session like this, and or sneaking it in throughout the day?
So exercise doesn't have to be one bout. I think that's the biggest misconception people have, is I have to have a 45-minute or an hour block. What if you had 3 20-minute blocks? What if you had 3 15-minute blocks? However you break it up throughout your day. If you sit at a desk all day, I could argue that 3 20-minute blocks are pretty damn valuable versus you just getting off work, stressed to get to the gym on time. The whole time you're at the gym, you're thinking about getting home to get dinner started. So it's finding where it fits best in your schedule. But when it comes to mobility, going back to what that word is, if every exercise is a mobility intervention and we're looking at it from that intent perspective, then that's what they are. So now every exercise you do can be that sort of intervention. But if you want to put in conventional or traditional mobility movements that you might see in one of my programs, I have guys and girls that do it during their rest periods. So it's more of like an active movement, like in between rest periods. They do it during warm up. They do it for like a post workout. Sometimes they do it for their 2-a-day. So they'll do their 20 or 30-minute session later in the day, and they're doing first thing in the morning, their movement, their daily vitamin, their daily dose of movement is what a lot of people have prescribed it or said it to me as, is your movement programs are my daily multivitamin, my multivitamin for movement. And I just take it daily. Like, that's awesome. Like, whatever makes you feel good. When it comes to performance, we always talk about performance in a capacity of like quantitative measurements, but no one ever talks about it from a health and wellness. Like, wellness leads performance. And that was another conversation we had with the mobility team that actually Jeremy started as well. But it just makes you think, like, when you feel good, how valuable is that? And that's where those daily movements come into play.
We had a lot of people write in and ask specifically about mobility issues or just tightness in general in their hips and their ankles. Those seem to be pretty common, at least among our audience here and people who were asking. A lot of people ask best bang for your buck.
When it comes to the hips, the hips should be trained, as the rotational joint that they are. It's a ball and socket joint. When it comes to most programming that I see and problems with it, is we treat the hips just like knees, just in flexion and extension, and there should be rotation involved. So whether that's from a seated position, like a shin box rotation, kind of moving back and forth, feeling that ball and socket joint move, or standing up into like a hip airplane. Now that we're using that pelvis moving on the fixed femur, creating rotation around that ball and socket joint. For honestly, to make things very simple, when it comes to the clientele I've worked with, those simple 2 movements, a shin box rotation moving on the ground and standing up in a hip airplane, they oftentimes, the second we do them one set, they go, man, I feel so much better. I feel like my hips are moving. Well, you just treated your hip like a hip. Yeah. You just treated it like it should be treated. No different than the shoulders. Some people say the same thing with shoulders. The shoulders are nothing but horizontal and vertical pressing machines nowadays. It is a ball and socket joint as well. So when it comes to interacting with the ground in these crab to crawl flowing, and like I'll post like some of my athletes doing breakdancing type movements, and they get a bunch of laughs. But the second an athlete does something like that, then they're, man, my shoulders feel so much better. I don't know, maybe you just treated it like the joint that it is. You didn't force it into this, program that we normally utilize these joints as. And when it comes to the ankle, it's almost like we forget the point, how an ankle functions. We just slam that ankle down. Well, what's restricting that joint? Is it an actual stop that the way your ankle is constructed, each individual person, that you actually have no more space and it's just coming to that stop point as that joint sits? Or is it a tissue thing where, we have tight calves or some sort of movement upstream that's inhibiting that movement? So figuring out what's the root cause of it. Just because there's smoke there does not mean that's where the fire's at. And obviously looking at the body, that tension or far away can cascade that tension down to you think, oh, well, my hip's the problem here, or I have shoulder pain in my throwing mechanics, or, elbow pain. Well, where is that truly coming from? Is that just the point of least control, or the weakest chain in the link, or the weakest link in the chain that you're feeling it break there, where the actual proponent to the problem is deeper? It's, going one step in, one step closer to the spine, one step closer to the hip. So to me, that's where it's at. It's rotation is king, in my opinion. How can I free up rotation? How can I get things to rotate? And most people, when it comes to tension, feel better when they manage rotation better.
I would imagine no coincidence that your programming is called Exploring Mobility. I'm hearing explore, right? Don't just take things at face value. Explore, understand, how the body was built, understand anatomy in order to explore through the different ranges of motion.
To me, that's the word for everything. I jokingly say it all the time, but to me, that's it. If there was one way to do it that fixed all problems, then there would be one really rich person out there, and the rest of us would be doing what they're doing.
Sure.
We're all different individuals. We're all, biological organisms that are constantly changing and evolving and progressing, and some regressing. So it's, exploring movement and finding out what works for you. What works for you now might not work what's going to happen a week from now. I was working with this young volleyball team one time, and their coach said that he did personality tests on all his athletes. And I thought it was great intention. I was like, man, that's a great idea. And it shows that you truly care. But if you were judging how you communicate with your female athletes based off of one Myers-Briggs survey, which we all know now is not the best way to do it. What if they're not having a good time? What if they're, on their cycle, and now you're going to talk to them the rest of the season, how they tested one day, and that's how you're going to base your communication. So I think it's the same way with mobility. Or you're going to only program based off of one evaluation, how they felt one day, or are you going to constantly progress that? How are you feeling today? How can we get deeper in this range of motion? How can we control this range of motion better? What feels good? And that constant back and forth, that's what exploring is about. It's about collaboration between the coach and the athlete.
How important is it to build strength in the newfound range? So as mobility increases, is it possible to make an athlete too mobile? Do we need to focus on building strength in the newfound range of motion and mobility? And if so, how do you determine that?
So there's the terms that are kind of thrown around now with just different certifications that are out there: active range of motion versus passive range of motion. And I do feel that if you free up a range of motion, whether that's a neurological trick or some sort of massage technique, well, whatever it is, and there is a greater range of motion, that obviously we should elicit some sort of protocol after that, so that the athlete has control of that. But I don't know if I would necessarily say, oh, now I need to load it. But then what would that load be? It's something as simple as holding a isometric split squat with a elevated surface to get deeper in hip flexion. That's a pretty powerful movement there. So I think it goes to who is the athlete and what is deemed as too mobile or not too mobile. The ankles of a swimmer compared to the ankles of a basketball player can be quite the pendulum swing from what you're okay with and what you want. So it's who's the athlete and what their needs and the demands of the sport that they play. And then from then we get into the concepts of active versus passive range of motion. And there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of certifications that talk about this nowadays. But I do believe that if you have a greater range of motion, we should want to control that. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that strength? Does that mean you're using velocity to control it, doing dynamic movements? But being aware of those deep ranges of motion, more isn't always better. And then also understanding that make sure that the range of motion you are chasing, whether if it's from a joint, that you're not allowing other joints to donate mobility, and you're just so focused in on that one spot that you don't see that this mobility, this ability to get into this range of motion is truly coming from the rest of the body compensating to get the task done.
A quick follow-up question there. What about for the everyday athlete?
So when people say things like getting too mobile, I mean, you're not going to accidentally go into the splits. You're not going to accidentally, I'm never going to well, I guess if I did go to accidentally into a splits, there would be a big accidental problem that was going to happen around the split area. But you're not going to accidentally just fall into a bun. No different than I'm not going to accidentally fall into having a six pack. So I think when people say having too much range of motion, that's probably something they've already had. Someone that's very flexible, whether they come from a dance background, it's genetics, whatever it is, they can get into these deep ranges of motion. If they just wake up and they're cold, they can still get into these deep ranges of motion. So them having some, control in that I think is very important. But for the everyday gym lifter, you're not just going to accidentally fall into mobility and being this huge disparity between passive versus active range of motion. So I don't think that's as big of a worry as some people may think. So to me, it's just moving better, getting a little bit deeper in a range of motion, controlling it better, rotating more. There's just a lot of value with that.
Thanks so much. I want to be, respectful of your time again. I know you hate self-promotion, but for everyone out there, because I think you are an excellent Instagram follow, what's your Instagram handle?
Vernon Griffith 4.
We'll post it.
Wait a second. Vernon Griffith 4, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll make sure we post it here and everything. And like I said, to anybody watching us and any of our followers, you're a great follow, always super educational. And again, another plug, since I know you hate it, I'll do it for you. I would encourage people to go check out, what you have in the TrainHeroic marketplace as well, and just keep learning from me. I really appreciate the time. Thank you for, imparting some knowledge, certainly on me and anyone who watches this as well. I really appreciate it.
Hey man, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you.